Good evening and welcome to Quods Get Gold. Today is a special day. I don't want to put down the rest of the programs we have had, but we have a wonderful guest, and I have every expectation that at the end of the hour we are all going to be the wiser for it. Uh, our guest tonight is Entifadh Qanbar, or Qanbar. He is a president and founder of the Future Foundation, of which we're going to ask him about in a moment. He served as senior national security advisor for the Iraqi parliament, a deputy military attaché for the embassy of Iraq, national security advisor and spokesman for the Iraqi deputy prime minister of Iraq, national security advisor, deputy and spokesman to members of the Iraqi Governing Council, and a director of the Iraqi National Congress Foundation and the Iraqi opposition liaison with the Pentagon. And this he did after a long career assisting the launching of the new state of Iraq after the demise of Saddam Hussein. But let's have Entifadh tell you more about this in person. Hello, Entifadh.
Good evening.
Salam alaikum, Habib.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Now, you heard what I just said? I think it's but a glimpse of your career. You were telling me earlier that you are an engineer and that you were in the Iraqi Air Force during the war with Iran.
Yes, I do.
And then what happened?
Well, I graduated from University of Baghdad College of Engineering in 1980. I served from 1980 to 85 in the Iraqi Air Force during very harsh years of the war with Iran. And I was released from the army in 1985, and then I went to work for the Iraqi government. It was mandatory for us under the Ba'ath regime, which is basically a chauvinistic party. And one man ruled Saddam. And basically I served in the Iraqi government because I was a very good engineer. They took me to build Saddam's palaces. I built 2 palaces for Saddam. And then in 1987, I was arrested by the Iraqi military intelligence with my brother. We were tortured, and I was very lucky to be released. 11 of my colleagues in the same group were executed, and numerous of them
Was that the Muhabarak?
No, Istikhbarat Askariya, military intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah. They call it in Iraq the whale, because if it swallows you, you're never out.
Yes.
And I was in the worst part of the Istikhbarat Askariya, which is, they call the 5th division, which is where people disappear, never come back. It was days of hell. It has some reminder of what you see of people coming out of famine. That's how when I left my imprisonment, I looked like I can count my ribs on my chest. And
I know the feeling, believe me.
Yeah, it was starvation, torture, everything, psychological. Anyway, so in 1990, I came to the United States, and I immediately applied for a political asylum. And then I went to the University of Rhode Island. I studied civil environmental engineering, groundwater contamination. Then I went to Georgia Tech, and I did my studies on environmental engineering again, wastewater treatment and environmental policy. And then I worked with the U.S. Air Force on decontaminating air bases such as Robbins Air Force Base as a contractor. And then in 2000, I was honored to be given the assignment to come to Washington and open the Iraqi National Congress office in Washington, the main umbrella group for Iraqi opposition to Saddam. And I opened the office here in Washington, Pennsylvania Avenue. And that was at the end of President Clinton's. Then when President Bush won, the office flourished. And then after September 11th, we got more attention. And then the decision came to liberate Iraq from Saddam. I mean, I also worked with Dr. Chalabi here in Washington as a volunteer when I was in Georgia Tech on the Iraq Liberation Act. In 1996, I helped the Iraqi athlete to defect from the Olympics, and it was a big news. And his testimony of the horror he saw in Iraq was very useful for us to pass the Iraq Liberation Act in 98. Then in 2003, I became the liaison with coalition forces, the liaison officer, and I was transferred to the U.S. base in Qatar, Sailia, and I worked on the transfer or the airlifting of Iraqi free forces from northern Iraq to Nasiriyah. And then I went back to Iraq and I started my work with Chalabi as his spokesman, his advisor, and the governing council. And then I had a very unique experience of participating in the writing of the Iraqi constitution, which was very fulfilling experience. And then we saw I became the advisor and the spokesman again for Dr. Chalabi when he became the deputy prime minister of Iraq. And then I became the deputy military attaché in Washington. And then I worked as a general manager for a TV station we opened in Lebanon, Beirut. It belongs to Chalabi. It's called Asia. And then in 2014, I decided to leave Lebanon because I was endangered. And then I came to the US in 2016, and I tell people I came back. I came in 2000 to liberate Iraq from Saddam. I'm coming back here to liberate Iraq from Iran.
Yes, I thought that in 16 you were coming to liberate the US from Obama, but that may be an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that in 2009 things looked up bright for the future of Iraq?
Well, look, the United States made a lot of mistakes. But before I say that, the narrative or the idea that Iraq was a stable country and the United States in 2003 broke this stability and became unstable is a myth, and it's not true. Iraq never was a stable country. Since inception in 1921, when the Iraqi army and the Iraqi state was formed, my grandfather was an Ottoman army who basically was transferred from the Ottoman army service to the new Iraqi army in 1921. Right. Since from 1921 till 2003, we had at least 9 coups d'etats, 9 military coups d'etats, and all of them were bloody. And the last coup d'etat was when the Ba'ath Party came to power in 1968 for the second time. And we have 6 to 7 external wars, 3 wars with Israel, and numerous internal wars, including a war of 5 years from 1970-75 with the Kurds in northern Iraq, and not to mention in 1991 the crushing of the uprising, which probably cost Iraqis about 300,000, people. So the idea that Iraq was a stable country and the United States destabilized Iraq by invading Iraq is not true at all. What the United States did not bring instability to Iraq. The United States let the problems of Iraq appear to the surface. We were living under a brutal dictatorship, North Korean style. We are disconnected from the outside world. So people didn't hear about the differences and divisions of the Iraqi society. When the dictatorship fell, all the differences came to the surface. We saw that in Yugoslavia, we saw that in the Soviet Union, we saw that in and none of these countries were invaded. That's the outcome of a brutal dictatorship when it goes away. If Saddam had tripped from his stairs or died, you would see the same thing happening in Iraq. So, but when I went back to 2003, I saw a devastated Iraq because of the sanctions by the international community, and then another sanction which Saddam did on the Iraqi people to victimize himself as the America is killing the Iraqi babies. So the Iraqi society was devastated, impoverished. The social fabric has been destroyed. The education has been destroyed. Everything was destroyed. So when we came, what we found is much worse what we expected to have. And now a country who has never, by the way, since 1958, when the military coup d'etat overthrew the king, we never had the democracy. So our choices to choose politics doesn't exist in Iraq. And after 68, it became impossible. You literally could go, people were executed, eyewitness people in prison were executed because they said a joke about Saddam with his wife in the bedroom, not even in public. So to say that the overthrow of Saddam was a mistake is immoral statement, in my opinion. However, the United States of America made many mistakes, and the Iraqi people as well made very, very bad choices. Most of it because they don't know what's democracy and they don't understand it. So a lot of Iraqis were voting to go to heaven, not to have a better future. They voted for religious Islamists. They listened to, they were seduced by Islamists' talk. Just like with the Muslim Brotherhood, how they won, for example, in Egypt and other countries. So they capitalized on the naivete of the Iraqi people and the lack of experience. Anyway, but the United States made huge progress in two fronts. The United States, at the end, before the withdrawal, was able to a great extent to end terrorism in Iraq on a large scale. Al-Qaeda was diminished. All terrorist groups were diminished. But there was a major success with the western part of Iraq, which was all the extremist Islamist group coming out, and what they call the awakening. A lot of the sheikhs.
The Qanbar awakening, yes.
Yeah, they started to, as General Petraeus used to say, we pay them a lot of money better than bullets, and so a lot of them became.
I remember at the time some of us speculated that the Islamic State was of such cruelty that a lot of the tribes in Qanbar decided that the U.S. might be a lesser evil.
Of course, I mean the biggest victims of the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda were the Sunnis themselves, because they were in Sunni areas and they obliterated their own Sunni areas. A lot of them are foreign fighters, by the way, who are not Iraqis and not welcomed by Iraqis. Anyway, a lot of countries funded Al-Qaeda, facilitated some Gulf countries, Syria, Assad, Iran through Syria. But the United States was able to a great extent. Also, there was the Iran started the Mahdi army at that time, the JAM, Jaish al-Mahdi, with the leadership of Muqtada al-Sadr, which is basically the Shia resistance. And Qasem Suleimani micromanaged the creation of the Jaish al-Mahdi. At that time, they didn't have any other group. Now, we have to understand what Muqtada's movement is.
I was going to ask you specifically, because at one time they were one of the staunchest enemies of the U.S., and there was a moment that I remember as if it was yesterday, that he was essentially surrounded and moments away from being killed and his Mahdi army disbanded.
But
But something
Dr.
happened.
Chalabi saved his life, basically saved his life twice. First, look, Muqtada al-Sadr, his movement come from the people who are impoverished, who are forgotten, the Shia class, which are, you want to call them the deplorables. All the Shia low class who has no education, who are living in a mythical world, followers of his father. If you read the literature of his father, some of it's unbelievable. It's like he talks about aliens but he was able to attract all those people, and those people are also Arabists. They believe in Arabists, because they are from Iraq. Versus the aristocrats of the Shia are the Marja'iyya, the great Marja'iyya, the great leaders, who are, most of them are non-Iraqis, Persians or Afghanis, and sitting on billions of dollars of money. So this is a class division, it's not a political division. Muqtada al-Sadr gave chance to those people who are forgotten, who live in cemeteries, who live in dump holes, who lives in ghettos, who lives in houses made of nothing. I mean, have nothing. Mud and some of them even they don't have a roof in the house. He brought them to the surface and gave them a voice. At the same time, the United States tried in a naive way to bring someone who they trusted, who is the son of a famous Marja'iyya who died, and they brought his son back to Najaf, and they tried to revive his comeback. So it became more outrageous for this impoverished class who just found their way or their chance to have their voice out. So the attack on the Americans was their claim of fame. That's how they can look powerful. And by the way, Muqtada al-Sadr in 2005 almost killed Ayatollah Sistani. Yes. Because they called the Marja'iyya of Sistani the silent Marja'iyya, the one which is silent on the oppression of the people. Because the Marja'iyya of Najaf, the aristocrats, if you want to call them, the non-Arabs, spend 50% of their energy maybe to protect the Shia, the other 50% to protect themselves and to keep their status. And in fact, Saddam had basically put Muqtada al-Sadr's father on the payroll, and he was supported by the Iraqi intelligence because he was considered the Arabist movement in Najaf against the Iranian mullahs in Najaf. But his father was a loose cannon. He started wearing coffins and making statements against Saddam. So Saddam killed him, and there's a lot of evidence or circumstantial evidence. It's possible that Iranians killed Muqtada's father with the collusion of the Iraqi intelligence, because Iranians were very unhappy about him too, and he was trying to basically bring the center of Shiism to Najaf, back to Najaf, where it belongs, because the Iranians' competition with the Marja'iyya in Iraq is they want to make the Marja'iyya in Qum versus Najaf, which is where Imam Ali is, where it should be. So this struggle, under the ground struggle always happening, that the Iranians after the revolution in 1979, and because of Saddam's oppression to Najaf, they were able to transfer the center of gravity of the Shia to Qum. And also the people should know that Khomeini was, after 1975 deal between Iraq and the Shah, was expelled to Iraq, and he lived in Najaf, and Khomeini was on the Iraqi intelligence payroll. In fact, what is outrageous, anybody in Najaf who wants to have something done with the Iraqi government goes to Khomeini. He was their go-to person to have things done for them with the Iraq, because he has such a leverage with the Iraqi government. And when the Shah made the deal with Saddam in 1975. The Shah wanted him back, and Saddam refused, or the Ba'ath Party refused, and they sent him to France. And even in France, he was still on Iraqi payroll. And Saddam thought if Khomeini goes back, they will have an ally in Tehran versus the Shah, who is powerful, and they were not able to. He was, strong opponent or strong enemy.
Right.
When Khomeini went back to Tehran, of course, he declared animosity to Saddam, and he started, trying to export his revolution.
And the collaboration ended. He ended up with a stronger government in Iran and declared enemy of the Ba'ath Party.
And I'm telling you,
interesting miscalculation.
Your viewers now, I'm going to say that for the first time. In 2003, we got the files of the Iraqi intelligence. The Iranians went crazy to come to Baghdad and collect every file about Khomeini, and they did. They paid money. They used their connections to the Shia establishment, to Ahmed Shah. They cleaned up anything about Khomeini in the Iraqi intelligence that we have found, because it was a huge embarrassment to them. So going to this, going back to the Americans' role, as I said, the Americans succeeded in basically killing terrorism in Iraq to a great extent. And also the Americans did a big achievement. They helped us tremendously, invested a huge amount of effort and the military and knowledge to write the Constitution. And we came out with a very, very good Constitution. The Constitution of Iraq is better than any Constitution in the region. Than any Arab country is probably better than some European constitutions. So this Constitution was voted on directly by a referendum of the people, which was protected by American soldiers. Many of them were killed or injured, young American soldiers, to protect. And the Constitution passed by only 50,000 votes difference in Mosul. It was a very difficult Constitution to write, like any Constitution, any country, specifically in Iraq. We were like for 17 days, 17 hours a day to trying to came out. And when I was the one who declared the Constitution to the media, I called a night reader at 1:30 a.m. and Chalabi and Masoud Barazani was sitting, and Ambassador Khalilzad was sitting in the room. The night reader refused to take the news because they said, "You're lying to us." Then I had a friend in the New York Times who basically, because they trust me, they put it. So it was an impossible thing. Then what surprised me, the hasty and withdrawal and now not leaving any, the United States could have left 20,000, 50,000 soldiers easily at that time.
Yes.
But they did not.
There was a status of forces agreement. That
a SOFA. We had a SOFA. We had a SOFA, and the SOFA was basically negotiated from one side, the Americans, because the Iraqi delegation with the Maliki know nothing. He basically sent his party members. By the way, the Dawah party is another chauvinistic, as I describe it, as a Stalinistic Islamic party. So anyway, the Americans made a huge mistake by choosing, handpicking Maliki to become the prime minister, for example. Anyway, but the problem is, the second huge thing that shocked me or shocked everybody here, the Americans washed their hands from the Constitution and never pressed for it when Obama came to power. And until then, you would expect the amount that the United States has invested in this Constitution, they will hold Maliki or any prime minister accountable to it. One of the issues in Constitution is the federalism. Look, as I said from the beginning, Iraq was never a stable country. And one of the reasons Iraq was never a stable country, we never had a constitution. There's always a temporary constitution. Second of all, the concentration of power in Baghdad. Iraq is an oil country. So the government owns the police, owns the army, and owns the whole money. In fact, to be honest with you, it's impossible to have democracy in this kind of environment, because democracy becomes democracy of oligarchs who became rich from the government, and they become party leaders, and they
and you put the finger in the issue when you said that the Iraqi people had never experienced a democracy, and without people knowing how democracy works, and even countries that had a democratic government for decades or centuries collapsed when people lost an idea of how it works. And without educating
Absolutely.
the Iraqi people into the workings of democracy and the art of negotiation, it doesn't just magically happen, does it?
No, it doesn't. I tell you, Maliki got 750,000 votes in his second term. One person, because he was claiming he's going to take the revenge of Imam Hussein's killing 1400 years ago. And people voted for him. So what I'm trying to say, but at the same time, why did the United States choose Maliki to start with? Why would you expect
your guess is as good as mine? I was bedazzled by that choice.
He was invited to U.S. Embassy on a dinner, and people told me when they told him he's going to be the prime minister, the spoon fell from his hand. He was shocked. He himself did not believe it. And then they pumped him so much. And then, again, we're going to Iraq. The instability of Iraq was also, as I said, the concentration of power in Baghdad. So when we put federalism in the constitution, and we use the model, the successful model of Kurdistan, the de facto federal state from 91 to 2003, even Saddam in power because of the protection of the United States. So we said we should do all Iraq federalism, or at least open the door for federalism of all over Iraq and dispute the wealth. So this way, Baghdad will not continue to oppress the rest of the country. What is shocking to me, again, American diplomats and bureaucrats will support a certain prime minister, and they will support centralism, because they think if they support centralism, they will empower him at the expense of federalism. And we saw that happening in 2017 after the Kurdish referendum. American special envoy was supporting Iraqi militias, basically, or at least turning blind eye, more than blind eye, he was supporting to take over Kirkuk from the Kurds.
From the Kurds, yes.
Because the United States at that time, they were in love with Haider al-Abadi, the prime minister, who they think he is the best guy or the best ally to the United States.
Well, I have to tell you that there are some politicians in the U.S. that look to centralized governments with lots of power with envy.
Yes, absolutely.
They don't realize the blessings we have in the U.S., and they are quick to embrace centralism and autocratic control because they think it's easier to govern that way.
Exactly.
And as many of us know,
yeah,
you can suppress dissent through the use of force, but you cannot eliminate it, and eventually it explodes.
It's not only that. We have tried this before. They cannot more powerful than Saddam. Saddam was the ultimate powerful killer. Strong man. He killed 180,000 Kurds in 6 months during the Anfal operation, 1986. You cannot exceed that. I witnessed that with my own eyes. I was in the Iraqi army. They basically demolished 6,000 villages in 6 months. That's an achievement, with bulldozers and chemical weapons. So
as an engineer, you have to admire the efficacy of the effort.
Unbelievable. They come, they siege the village, they speak in loudspeakers. Most of the Kurds don't understand even Arabic. And then they go on the village, they bombard it, and they flatten it, literally, because they wanted to create a buffer zone between Iraq and Iran. The other misunderstanding of Iraq, which people hear, they think that Iraq was not on the lap of Iran. After 2003, it became. That is not true. Saddam was anti-Iran from 1980 to 1988 during the war. By the way, I lost 4 of my cousins in this war.
Yeah.
After 1990 and 91 specifically, during the Gulf War, Saddam sent all the Iraqi fleet of the Air Force jets to Iran and the Iraqi
for
Airways.
safekeeping.
And he opened his doors to the Iranians and became a strong ally to Iran. And he started, the Iranians, Rafsanjani, the President Rafsanjani, became his partner, and they started to smuggle oil along the Iranian seashore because of the sanctions. And by the way, the very same methodology and the same people and individuals, many of them who smuggled Iraqi oil through Iran in the 90s, are smuggling Iranian oil now.
Yes.
They use the same assets and the
Are,
same
are they using
way.
the same French connections?
They are using, I don't know about the French connection, but I know that they are using forged papers to transfer oil from one tanker to another. There's a very good article in the Wall Street Journal came out 2 days ago. I advise everybody to read it, how Iran is selling oil, their oil, and Iraq is selling this oil now on behalf of Iran as an Iraqi oil. It's a big scam. And the United States still treat the Iraqi government as an ally. That's not the behavior of an ally government.
No.
Yeah. The other thing, for example, the Iraqi Constitution, Article 9, prohibits the formation of militia outside the army and the police. And this specific article was requested by the Badr Brigade. The Badr Brigade are Iranian-supported Iraqis who fought against us, against the Iraqi army for 8 years from the Iran side. They were Iraqi dissidents. And then when they came back, they basically part of the IRGC, part of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. We came back, we said, okay, let's reconcile. And so they didn't want to form any militia themselves, they asked us, and they want to become part of the Iraqi army. And they did blend with the Iraqi army. We basically have them enlisted in the Iraqi army. And this article was put to prohibit any militia. Why? Because every Iraqi has suffered from the Ba'ath Party militia from 1968 to 2003, which is called the Jaish al-Sha'bi, the Popular Army, who were basically knocking people's doors, harassing people everywhere. And they were like the thugs of all thugs. So we said, this bitter experience, we don't want to have be repeated. Then the Iranians go and flip on their own position with their own proxies and form al-Hashd, the Popular Mobilization.
Popular Mobilization Forces.
Yeah. And by the way, every American should know, Sistani's fatwa, the edict of Sistani, did not mention to form militia. It said people should volunteer to go to enlist in the Iraqi army and the Iraqi armed forces. But Qasem Suleimani, and I got this from Chalabi personally. I called him and he told me, Qasem Suleimani was in my house. We had lunch and he told me he's waiting for fatwa from Sistani to form the militia. Why? Because Qasem has an ambition to form the IRGC of Iraq. And Qasem has an ambition, also people should know, to make Baghdad as an alternative capital to the Islamic Empire rather than Tehran, because he was telling his close people that if something happened in Tehran, we can survive the empire, the Islamic Empire, Wilayat al-Faqih from Baghdad. And that's why I keep saying, what President Trump, by killing Qasem Soleimani, probably the biggest achievement the US have done since the revolution in 1979 with Iran.
Yes.
And Iran has lost its nuts since then. And I don't think anybody in Iran in 20 years can fill the shoes of Qasem Soleimani.
Well, one can say that Soleimani had an aura of invincibility and a gumption that allowed him to act in Lebanon, in Syria, in Argentina, for crying out loud, in Europe, in Iraq, in Africa, with the sense that he was untouchable. And the, shall we say, removal of Soleimani from this earth is left a message for his successors that you're not safe anywhere.
Absolutely. He was his own, he was a state inside the state. I tell you, the president of Iran complained to some people that they told me that Khamenei told him, you have to correct our budget. They were going through difficult times. They had no cash, no dollars. That was in 2013 because of the war in Syria, Khatami. And he told so he went and did some, let's say, auditing on the whole government. And Qasem Soleimani was receiving at that time, this is from Khatami's mouth, $3 billion budget. $3 billion, only from Iran, only from the Iranian government. Not to mention the drug, the drugs.
An extra $2 billion from Hezbollah's drug business in South America.
South America, Lebanon, from leasing Iraqi oil, you name it. And Khatami went to Qasem Soleimani and told him, if you could please give me some accounting of what you're spending. Qasem Soleimani told Khatami, according to Khatami, so no sir, I'm not going to give you anything. So Khatami went back to Khamenei and told him, you told me to audit everything. This is what Soleimani. Khamenei told him, don't touch Soleimani. He can spend as much money without any accountability. So what Qasem Soleimani knows about the networks of Iran, I don't think the Iranian government knows it. What Qasem Soleimani has the capability to achieve, that's why, I mean, this guy, Qani, the Iraqi militias, believe me, the minions of Iran, they are minions of Iran. Yes. They make fun of him in private meetings. They make fun of him because this guy cannot speak Arabic. His only experience was in Afghanistan versus Qasem Soleimani working underground with the Islamists in Iran since he was 14 years old. And for 30
so let's say that his removal is the best thing to happen to Iraq since the war.
To the whole world, to the humanity, yes. To the whole world.
I believe that too.
There is no place on this planet where Qasem Soleimani did not have a hand of terror. Absolutely.
Yes.
Qasem Soleimani is responsible for killing 603 American soldiers. If anybody say he should not be killed, he should go to the families of 603 American soldiers. One of them is my nephew, the last soldier, the American soldier killed in Iraq, Ahmed Al-Tai. He was killed by a direct order after he was kidnapped by Qasem Soleimani. So what I'm trying to say...
I'm sorry about that.
Well, it was a very tragic 5 years of search for him until then turned to search for remains. And then we got his remains and he's resting in peace in Ann Arbor, Michigan now. So anyway, what I'm trying to say, the United States should have never left no soldiers in Iraq, and the United States should always have pushed for the implementation of the Iraq Constitution, and the United States should not accept that the Iraqi government legislate a law to form the militia. As many U.S. diplomats, I'm shocked to say, they say this is an internal matter. No, it is not. First, they are violating the peace and stability of the area. Then, second is a violation of the Constitution. Do you know that the Iraqi militias are the only militias, terror militias, who are funded officially by a government? The Iraqi government has a line item, $2 billion salaries to the Iraqi militias, and part of these dollars are subsidized by the United States of America. They share intelligence. The United States of America share with the Iraqi government, and they have a line item of $80 million to import their own weapons. The Kurdish
then people are
Peshmerga.
surprised when the Grand Imam of al-Azhar speaks of terrorism funded by the U.S. And we do, unfortunately.
Well, I tell you, the militias in the invasion of Kirkuk in 2017 used the M1 American-made Abrams. Okay, yeah. They are using American weapons left and right to kill demonstrators, and the United States could very easily pressure the Iraqi government, tell the Iraqi government, listen, if you continue to fund those terrorist militias who openly on Iraqi TV say we are answerable to Khamenei, we are part of Iran. One of them, yes. One of the leaders said on TV, if there is a war between Iraq and Iran, I will side with Iran. So they could very much tell the Iraqi government, look, we are happy to help you as an ally against ISIS, but at the same time, if you continue to fund those militias, we cannot help you anymore. Congress should do that. Look, the popular mobilization units were formed in 2000 forces and PMF formed in 2014, and they have all these privileges. The Peshmerga, the Kurdish Peshmerga, who are the best allies to the United States, who supported us in the Iraqi opposition against Saddam. All our offices inside Iraq were protected by the Kurdish Peshmerga, have not changed their weapons from light to middle range weapons since 1993, after 2003 until today, because American weapons that goes to Baghdad, the heavy weapons, the juicy, nice weapons are kept in Baghdad and not given to Kurdistan. And when General Dempsey was asked by Senator Cruz that, are you giving the Peshmerga weapons? Dempsey said yes, because technically, yes, because he's giving it to Baghdad, but Baghdad is not giving to the Kurds or the Peshmerga. So I call this discrimination on steroids. And the United States accepted
you can say that. You touched on a point there. Let me get back on screen. I'm trying to give you as much room as possible. But you touched on a point there. And by the way, you are a Sunni Iraqi, if I'm not mistaken, and yet you speak very well of the Kurds, and you have great respect for Kurdistan, which I find most interesting and encouraging.
Not only that, I spent 20 years working with the Shia. Establishment in Iraq, and I basically worked and defended the Shia. I'm an Iraqi patriot who defends any Iraqi who's oppressed. My grandfather, my great father was in the they called it gendarme during the Ottomans. My grandfather was an officer in the Ottoman and the Iraqi army. My father was a officer in the Iraqi Navy, participated in 1941 revolt. So, and I served in the Iraqi army also. So we are 6, 7, 8 generations of army officers, and we believe in Iraq. I believe in united Iraq. I love the Kurds to stay with us, but I also respect their will and their the right to self-determination. And if I want to keep the Kurds in Iraq, I have to treat them well. I cannot deprive them of their right.
The federation would have to work as such.
Exactly. And what we saw now, what we are seeing now from Baghdad, they are trying to siege the Kurds. And I always say this is the virus of the chauvinistic virus of Baghdad, which goes from one ruler to another. That Baghdad looks down to the rest of Iraq, and everybody should go on their knees to Baghdad, and specifically the Kurds. And the United States has to support the Kurds because simply is the only oasis of success we have in Iraq now. And the Kurdish people have adopted Western values very quickly, and they love the. I mean, 4,000 American soldiers were killed in Iraq. Zero was killed in Kurdistan.
Zero in Kurdistan.
Not even one injured. Not even a
But-
car accident.
But a lot of Peshmergas were killed in the fight against ISIS
Of course,
and the fight against Al Qaeda.
The Kurdish people love the United States of America. When the U.S. military was in Iraq, they have to go in armored vehicles. They have to wear vests. They have to be very careful from IEDs and all kind of attacks. In Kurdistan, they walk the streets and people will receive them with welcoming. So this is a totally different culture. You go to Erbil now, you feel you are 20, 30 years ahead of the rest of Iraq. It's a thriving, beautiful, Western-oriented city.
And
Why are we?
they're not getting money from Baghdad, are they?
Baghdad is playing all this kind of cat and mouse the deal with them, and they basically seized them one time. Now the federal court issued this decree of the oil in Kurdistan export is illegal, which is nonsense. And Iran, of course, very, very unhappy about Kurdistan because there is this nice Western-oriented oasis next door to them. And Iranians, by the way, coming by the hundreds of thousands for tourism to Erbil.
Yep.
So that makes the mullahs very uncomfortable.
Still, Iran recently started shooting rockets from Iranian territory to Erbil.
Yeah, of course.
For the first time, I believe, since this all began.
Because they claim there's a Mossad center, and it was a house who belongs to a very well-known oil businessman in Erbil. His name is Baz Barzanchi. And the Iraqi parliament, which is most of it formed a committee of, most of them were proxies of Iran, members of parliament, visited the site and issues a report. There's no Mossad center here. So I don't think Mossad will choose a palace as a center anyway.
No, I don't think they go. They wouldn't put a neon light sign indicating where they are either.
Exactly.
I think if there is any Mossad over there, it's going to be in the most discreet place nobody can identify.
Yeah, I say the Iranians, they have to go the Mossad in Tehran, not in Erbil.
Right. Now, let me ask you a couple of questions because we are going to run out of time, and we may need eventually another hour to complete this. For the past decade or so, we've had the Kurds administering Kurdistan in what could be termed an exemplary manner for the region, and they have done so with some of the most difficult circumstances. The number of refugees that went over there is a ratio of refugees to autochthonous population that I rarely see anywhere. Not like 1 to 1, but close.
2 to 4, maybe.
2 to 4, and with the Yazidis and by the way, they have Christian and Muslim refugees.
The highest concentration of Christians in the region now is in Erbil.
Now it's in Erbil because of this.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they have to fend for themselves and export oil and gas through Turkey and try to survive rather tempestuous waters. Then Baghdad to the south, with this, shall we say, tug of war between pro-Iran forces and those who don't want Iran inside Iraq, which has led to a dysfunctional government, as far as I can see from here.
Well, what's happening?
Then in the middle, you have this corridor of weapons, terrorist drugs from Iran to the Mediterranean, where every terrorist organization the U.S. government claims is dead is very much active. And now I heard there's going to be a meeting in Erbil of politicians from all over Iraq to try and find a way to break the stalemate in the Iraqi parliament. Is this true? And what do you think are the possibilities with this, if true?
I think you put your fingers on something extremely important and dangerous, which is the land bridge from Iran, which goes through middle of Iraq, east of Iraq towards the south,
Yes.
west, and then go through the west desert of Qanbar, and that became the bloodline for Hezbollah of Lebanon.
Yep.
And they transfer weapons, personnel, all kind of things to Syria and Lebanon through Iraq. In 2017, here in Washington, I made a push through some friends here in Washington. I told them there is a land bridge. And I was very disappointed when I saw General Mattis at that time was the defense secretary, said there's no land bridge. Then a year after, Washington resists these ideas because they want to paint everything is going fine, especially when they are bureaucrats. And then they understood this is really serious, and the Israelis started attack this line of supply intensively during the Trump administration, and so as the U.S. Special Forces and the United States, and they made a huge progress because this is a very dangerous line. This became the main support for all terrorism in the region, especially in Syria and Lebanon, and that has extended the terror hand of Iran for the first time in history to the Mediterranean.
Yep.
With a continuation, strategic depth and continuation. So what I'm trying to say, now who's guarding this line and who's using it is the Popular Mobilization Forces, again funded by the Iraqi government and with the United States
and the U.S. and working for Iran.
Exactly. So this is something has to be tackled, and my fear for Iraq are the Kurds, because as I said, I'm afraid the U.S. will throw them under the bus and say, well, this is an internal matter, there's nothing we can do about it. But at the end of the day, if we lose Kurdistan, we lose everything in Iraq. We will lose a huge, important...
We lose the region.
We probably lose the best ally outside NATO, okay?
Yes. I would say Kurdistan is the key to stability in the Middle East. We lose Kurdistan.
Of course.
We lose Iraq, we lose Iran, we lose Syria, we lose any possibility of ever.
It would be a huge blow. It would be a huge blow, and the U.S. can maintain this. I'm telling people here in Washington, the Kurds do not need American soldiers to come and protect them. They can protect themselves, but just give them weapons. They use AK-47s and RPG-7s just like militia, not as an army. And the United States is giving F-16s to
just like the Mujahideen in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the United Arab Emirates gets F-16s and F-35s, and Bahrain gets F-16s and modern tanks. But the Peshmerga, who are more dangerous, and they can help the United States more, and they are better fighters, get light weapons, which is nonsense. I think that has to stop and has to be turned, and all under the pretext united Iraq. Okay, if Iraq is united, then American weapons should go equally throughout Iraq. It should go equally to the Kurdish Peshmerga. If you want, I'm not against united Iraq policy, but that's why I think one of the best models we should work out with the Kurds is the Taiwan model. I think Kurdistan could stay as we could call it one Iraq policy, or united Iraq policy, and we could have the Kurds armed to become a modern, advanced army, which could be a very important asset for the United States outside NATO.
Yeah, and for stability in Iraq as well.
For stability in Iraq, a weak Peshmerga is invitation for Iran to invade them, to meddle with them. If they have good, let's take the example of Israel. Israel is surrounded by vicious enemies, but how did they survive? By by protecting themselves, by fighting them, their presence with good weapons, good training, and the United States should invest in that. It's not going to cost the United States much. It's just the right policy and the right implementation. Is the will.
I'd go a
political
step
will.
further. The U.S. is going to save much by spending a little.
Of course. You don't need American soldiers to go. Those
If
people.
we ever see, may God not allow it, Abrams tanks with Khamenei pictures and Hezbollah flags rolling into Erbil, the cost to the United States and to the world is.
And so, quite honestly, even with Turkey, we can have a deal with the Turks. We can say, hey, you guys are after the PKK. If the Peshmerga becomes strong enough, the PKK are the enemies of the Kurdish people, not only the enemies of Turkey. And the Peshmerga, when it becomes strong enough, they can protect Kurdistan and prevent the PKK to infiltrate Kurdistan. The Turkish army doesn't have to go through enter Iraq and do all these things to go after the PKK. So we can solve many problems. We can stop ISIS. We can have it. We can have this a place for safe haven for the United States of America, even militarily or diplomatically. And also we could have a deal with Turkey to prevent another terror group. And by the way, people should know the PKK inside Iraq now are cooperating, on the payroll of the PMF.
Yeah.
Sometimes they even have joint checkpoints in northern Iraq.
Well, one thing most Americans don't realize is how politics makes strange bedfellows. There are people still claiming that, oh my God, Saddam couldn't be allied with Al Qaeda because he led a secular government, and you and I know it's nonsense. And half of Al Qaeda were working directly with Iraqi intelligence in Saddam's time, and we didn't talk about Salman Pak because everybody talks about
Zarqawi was funded by the Iraqi intelligence, and by the way, Saddam after 1991 became an Islamist. He did the Islamization campaign of Iraq.
Yes, that's when he even changed the flag.
So the people think of Saddam as pre-1990. Post-1990, there's a different Saddam.
What was that after the Khartoum meeting?
This is after the 1991 war.
Yeah.
After the 1991 war, Saddam had nowhere to go but Iran, and he did, and the Iranians accepted him, and they were making money. People don't know, in 2003, Qasem Soleimani was a staunch opposer to the removal of Saddam Hussein. Hassan Nasrallah has a speech in 2003 saying that we should not allow the Americans to remove Saddam Hussein because they had excellent relationship and oil smuggling business with Saddam, and they didn't think he should go. I've seen many Iranians who told me there was a heated discussion within the in Qom and Tehran, and Qasem Soleimani was in the camp of keeping Saddam in power.
Yeah,
because they were benefiting from Saddam.
All right, let me tell our viewers, in case they forget, that these programs are made in the hope that they will contribute to the Gold Institute for International Strategy. The link is both scrolling on screen and clickable in the description of the program right under the video. And please contribute so that the Gold Institute may continue to look for solutions to our policy problems, implementable solutions. And Entifadh is not, at least not yet, but not a member of the Gold Institute, but a friend of the Institute and a good friend who's always generous with his time and his ideas and his unfathomable knowledge of the area whenever requested, like today, or meetings. I understand you met with Eli.
Yes, Eli is a good friend, and
Not 2 days
must
ago.
thank you and thank the Golden Institute for this golden opportunity.
And before we go for now, because I believe there is much more that we can discuss, or that I can learn. For those who watch me on shows, they're probably surprised how silent I was most of the time, but it is because I am fascinating and absorbing like a sponge what you're saying. You established a Future Foundation, and this is the kind of thing that pleases my heart, because in the midst of all these apparently intractable problems, your foundation is an exercise in optimism. Is the notion that yes, there is a better world, and one day the young people of Iraq will not have to go through the tribulations you had to go through, and will grow in a prosperous and peaceful country. Am I getting this right?
Yes, you are. Actually, the Future Foundation is in the process of pending the registration, and my website is coming out very soon. I have done a whole the changes to the website, but the purpose of the foundation is exactly what I told you at the beginning of this meeting. Iraqis have never practiced democracy. We want to teach the Iraqi youth how to become politicians, how to understand democracy. Even with the recent October revolution in Iraq and the uprising of Muqtada, one of the reasons the current corrupt pro-Iran proxies are in power, they are very weak. The Iraqi people could walk on top of them now. They are getting less in number every day. The reason, because Iraqi young men and women do not have idea how to go about what the next step is. They know how to reject the current Iranian hegemony and the current Iranian regime, Iraqi corrupt regime. But they don't know what to go next. They don't understand what a constitution means. As simple as that. They don't understand what democracy means. So I think there's a huge gap, a huge market to teach Iraqis. Maybe we bring them here to the United States. Maybe we do seminars to them, young Iraqis. Hey, you can. There are certain articles in the Iraq Constitution who could protect you from this and that. You should use it. You should do this. When you demonstrate, you can do this. You can file a lawsuit. You can any community or volunteerism work that could advance their political purpose into a certain clear goals, not only rejection without any alternative.
Excellent. And if you ever need any help, I volunteer. I think it's a wonderful idea. Actually, I think we should get some American youth involved. They might be in need of similar training lately.
You're right.
The Tree of Liberty, said Jefferson, must be. I'm paraphrasing, not quoting. Must be kept alive with the blood of patriots, and that's a fantastically romantic concept. But the Tree of Liberty is kept alive with knowledge.
Yep, you're right.
Only an informed and educated people can govern themselves.
Absolutely.
The moment we don't know,
awareness is very important.
Awareness of your constitution, awareness of how it works. How do you participate in the process? How can you get your voice heard? How do you negotiate a solution? How do you go away from sectarianism into workable solutions without surrendering your principles? And
exactly.
we need to do this. And like I said, let me know. But in the meantime, we have run over the hour. I'm I'm so very honored and humbled by your generosity with your time, and I hope
Thank
we
you.
can do this again.
I'm ready to do it anytime. Thank you so much.
Great. Any other thing you would like to add?
No, I think we want to. I'm also starting an effort now to have people to people. I call it the Kurdish people. I went to Kurdistan. I met with the Kurdish leadership and the prime minister, and I want to start not government to government, Kurdish people to American people, to start the efforts of awareness and maybe pushing legislators here in the U.S. to have support of the Kurdish Peshmerga, as I said. And I'm starting an organization. I'm calling it the Kurdish Protection Action Committee.
Excellent.
So that's another thing I'm launching in the very near future. And I think we have to work very quickly. We don't have much time because Iran wants to destroy this beautiful success in Kurdistan.
Beautiful experiment.
Yeah.
Beautiful experiment. Yes, we not only have to teach the young, we have to teach our legislators on occasion and educate
Absolutely.
them.
We did the same thing with the Iraq Liberation Act, and I want to repeat the same experience, but with better knowledge and better understanding.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And have a good night.
Thank you, sir.
And I will be talking to you. I'm very curious about the second time with you. Let me see if I can find this thing somewhere around here, I guess. There we are. There we go. So thank you so much, and good night.
Okay, good night. Bye-bye.